Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your cemetery girls, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. And fear not, because I definitely know who David Warbeck is. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about that. But I'm here with somebody else who is also, I'm sure, familiar with a lot of people in the Lucio Fulci universe. Who's here with me today?
Well, it's me, Steve Guntley, but I prefer you call me the next Dick Miller. This is the podcast about horny corpses, headless stoners, and zombie giants. That's because this is the podcast about The Dead Hate the Living! A zombie horror film from 2000 that quietly has a reputation as one of the better full moon movies of this era, which I am, and I wrote that without even realizing that our guest today is actually going to be somebody who, let's say, had a bit of a hand in the making of this movie. Who's here with us today, Jared?
A little bit. A slight hand in this movie. So this is exciting because we've done some interviews in the past with some directors, writers, cast members, but we've done sort of career retrospectives. And the first time we really forayed into having someone directly involved in the project with us was Jeffrey Byron for the Dungeon Master episode, and that was a lot of fun to get that perspective from the movie we had just watched, from a person involved in the making. But it's super exciting. The person here with us today is actually the writer and director of The Dead Hate the Living, Dave Parker. So, Dave, thank you for coming on to the show and chatting about this movie and your career with of Full Moon with us.
Hey, guys. Thanks very much for having me on. Until listening to your podcast, I did not know there was podcasts about Full Moon or Empire, and being a big fan of those, it's pretty cool.
I can stop you right there, and you can drop the S from that word. There is podcast singular, and it is only us.
There's no one else in
this cottage industry.
We're keeping the flame alive, at least in our own modest way.
And that's been one of the best things, actually, is the people who've reached out to us. And this will date this slightly, but I was just at Monster Mania Con this past weekend in New Jersey. And, I brought some postcards for the show and handed them out to some people and talked the show up a little bit. And, it's crazy when you tell people you do a show that's only Charles Band stuff, Full Moon and Empire, they look at you like you're insane. But in the best way possible. And so I know a bunch of people are like, that's so great. I didn't know that such a thing existed. So to hear you say that too, I feel like I like to think we're coming through for the people that want to look back on some of these forgotten movies and properties and dissect them and talk about them and give them the respect that a lot of them deserve. And, just like anything else, when you talk about all the different eras of Full Moon, some is more successful than others. But we try to approach everything with reverence, and everything is at least a morbid, interesting curiosity, if not more.
Than that. And I think today we're dealing with the more category. I think The Dead Hate the Living is kind of, in the Full Moon fan community, sort of has that reputation as a bit of a sleeper, as a bit of a maybe one of the ones that people have not properly vetted out. And I was really excited to watch it for the first time. I had a blast with this movie. It was so fun. It's rare for us we're making a rare foray into zombie movies. Now, weirdly, it doesn't really come up for Full Moon very often. As popular as the zombie tropes are, we haven't really seen that many of them. And this has been one of the more significant ones. But Dave, I wanted to talk to you a little bit and just kind of, I'm curious about how you got started with Full Moon and getting involved in this whole crazy circus.
Well, I moved to Los Angeles around 1991, and very early on from moving here, I started working on the first movie I ever worked on, which was for the director Jeff Burr. And he was doing this movie. He had just done Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and I became the props assistant on it. Not even a PA, still a PA props assistant, but not a production assistant. And through him, I met a lot of people who just happened to work for Charlie at one time or another, whether it would be Courtney Joyner or David Dakota. They all just stopped around the set because they were all friends. And it was a thing that it was like, oh man, I would really love to get to work there, because this was at the time that, you know, Full Moon had their deal with Paramount Pictures. So the budgets were relatively healthy. At that time, starting out, it was like there was the choice between, you know, Roger Corman or Charlie Band. And Charlie Band's office happened to be in Hollywood, and Roger Corman's was in Venice. And at the time when I started, I didn't have a car, so it made much more sense. So through those people, and I think through another friend of mine, Robert Meyer Burnett, I met Daniel Schweiger, who was the head of promotions. And he did all the trailers. He cut all the trailers for Full Moon, and he worked on the Video Zone. So I got to know Dan, and then it was about a year after meeting him, Full Moon was finally up and running enough where they were busy enough where he could use some assistance. So I became the promotions assistant, you know, helping cut the trailers and the video zones, and that
another PA title. There you
go. Another one. So that's how I got my in with Full Moon. And it was just kind of no, not to go too deep into it. It was just kind of an amazing time there. It was a bustling, there was always stuff going on. You just had access to everyone, including Charlie, you know, at any time. You know, Charlie was always walking around the office, or he was available to talk to if you wanted to bring up something. His wife at the time, Debbie Dion, was there as well. She was the head of development. And then you had people like Ted Nicolau and Stuart Gordon and, you know, all these people just, you know, milling around the office. They all had offices, and you were working on their stuff, so you would interact with them and actors all the time. So it was really, and you would, because we were part of the Video Zone stuff, we would be going to a lot of the productions that were stateside, not Romania. They would, you know, they would fly someone to Romania to do that. We never got to do that. But yeah, it was just kind of a great way to earn and learn, as like they would say.
I mean, this was such a formative time for Full Moon as well. When you're there, like this is kind of at the height of the Paramount deal and all of that, and like everything's really firing on all cylinders for there. It sounds like it must have been kind of like a punk rock environment. You know, it's just everybody that we've talked to describe that era is just kind of like, yeah, everybody was just kind of going with it. You know, it was fly by the seat of your pants, and you learn on the fly, and you just, you know, keep a positive attitude.
Kind of. I would say that Troma is probably a little more punk rock than Full was. I think Charlie's budgets were bigger. I think his ambitions were bigger. I mean, Charlie is a great idea man, and that always, you know, excited me, because, you know, there would be paintings he would have made for just ideas. He would just get an idea, call his artist, have him do a concept painting or a promotional piece. So he was always coming up with really interesting, cool ideas, and everyone was just there, just doing it and having a good time, and, you know, making a decent living because the budgets were decent. You know, it was great. It was a really, there's nothing like it in Hollywood now that exists like this. There's nothing.
Not at all.
I can only imagine it. And you talk about some of the, like, what the atmosphere in that place must have been like. I mean, the Paramount years were kind of short-lived. I mean, you're looking at 1989 to 94, roughly 5-year period. But if you look at the output of Full Moon during that time, to think that a lot of these titles that are considered kind of classic Full Moon titles, like the first, you know, 3 Subspecies movies and the first 3 Puppet Master movies, and
yeah, you're talking about
the
first 5 Puppet Master movies.
First 5.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
all the way through 5. So it's actually beyond, the Paramount deal was beyond 94. It was deeper. It was probably like, I would say 96, 97 at least. You know,
okay. Yeah.
Or it really like started to change.
Yeah, but I just like a lot of those prods to imagine like all of those things being made in such quick succession, like what the atmosphere of like we're working on one thing, all right, we got it done, we're on to the next thing. And some of the stuff is so wildly different. It's like I love hearing stories of people who worked in it at that time. Like it just sounds like it was this infectious energy where you're making low budget movies, and obviously in the movie we're going to talk about today there's a lot of kind of meta commentary about what it's like to make a low budget movie. But it's like I think, and Steve and I talk a lot of the time, and one of the things we've really grown to appreciate watching some of the movies we hadn't seen from Full Moon during that time is the way there's a lot of people are there. There's a very tangible pride in the product they're putting out for a lot of it. We say like sometimes with like low budget churning things out, there's a way to feel like the system is kind of cynical, and we don't get that, especially from that time period. It seems like everyone really had legitimate faith, sincere faith in things that they were putting out. And I want to talk about the Dead Hate the Living a little more proper. So Steve, this is probably as good a time as any. Why don't you just quickly give us some stats for this movie, and then we'll get into it.
No, for sure. The movie The Dead Hate the Living was released February 8th, 2000. It's directed and written by Dave Parker, and it stars Eric Clausen, Jamie Donahue, Brett Beardsley, Wendy Speake, Benjamin Morris, and Matthew McGrory. Lots of new names for us here. Most significantly is Mr. Parker right here. Now, I was reading in Dave J's book, it came from the video aisle, that you had kind of reached a point around the time this movie was being made where you were about ready to move on, and this movie was actually kind of given to you by David Dakota. Is that an accurate story?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, at that time, I'd been at the company for a long time, and Charlie certainly knew that I wanted to direct very, very early on when I started working there.
Yeah.
And I would get little tastes of things, and he had me. I did additional shooting on something called Craw the Sea Monster, and I did second unit on The Creeps, directorially, that type of stuff. But he was sort of like, as any boss would like, they want to keep the person who's there, that he likes them in that position. So he doesn't, no one likes to like have to move someone away, because then he's got to find someone else to take over what you're not doing.
Right.
So, but I was talking to Dakota about all of this, and Charlie offered him, it was a year where Charlie came up with a bunch of titles and everything, and Charlie offered him this script, and he goes, it's a zombie movie, Charlie, and everything, and Dave Parker really wants to direct, and if you don't let him, you're going to lose him. So that's kind of how it was. So yeah, in essence, yeah, Dakota like sort of turned it down to give me the opportunity,
which is kind of an unheard of thing in the film industry. That's pretty cool. Like,
yeah, I don't think I think it speaks more to how much Dakota was working at the time for
yeah, he is a prolific man
doing the Torchlight stuff and doing Full Moon stuff. I mean, he definitely had his plate overflowing, and he could pick and choose a lot of the things that he wanted to do. So
yeah,
it was an incredibly rare and cool move that I'll always be grateful for.
And so this title was already locked before you came on board, right? This isn't your title. Yeah, it's an amazing title. I love any movie with a solid exclamation point at the end of the title, and I just love the kind of late 60s, early 70s, like Italian splatter vibe that kind of puts out. So yeah, okay, so this is, we've read and talked to many people, and that's kind of the whole Charlie Band production pipeline, is come up with a title, come up with a poster, and then you can kind of run with it from there. Was that sort of the deal with you as well? Absolutely. Well, so you got to kind of develop however you wanted.
Yeah, he had, originally he had a script written for this, but it was a script that was set more for Romania.
Oh, okay.
So when he approached me to it, I read the script, but knowing that it was going to be shot here in Los Angeles, I said, well, Charlie, none of this really applies here. We can't do this here. you have, too many. We have to be in one location and everything. It was like, well, come up with something. So I did, and he said, yeah. And I don't know if he paid attention too much about what I was telling him, or he was just busy with other things. And I think part of it was just like, well, good, bad, or indifferent. I know Dave's gonna do his damnedest to try to make a good movie, so I'll just sort of go with it.
Well, I think, yeah, that's kind of like what Steve's saying too. Like, that seems like such an odd amount of trust from a producer to a filmmaker, to be so hands off and to leave, to be like, okay, like you're the guy who's going to direct this movie, and it's like I trust that you'll make a good movie and you'll do what's best for it. I mean,
and again, Charlie Band, a guy with an overflowing plate around this time for
yeah,
sure.
But I got to say with Charlie, he always, he and his wife at the time, Deborah Dion, they took a shine to me. I was really enthusiastic about working there and doing the stuff that I was doing. When he was directing Head of the Family, I mean, everything was right there. There was a point where we moved to Glendale, to a place where he had sound stages. Everything was under one house. All the effects people, David Allen had his own little building. The Mark Rappaport and the effects team had their own building. We had 2 sound stages, dressing rooms, wardrobe, everything all under roof. So like when Charlie was directing Head of the Family there on the stage, he'd call me from my office and have me sit and watch him direct.
Oh, wow.
And learn from him, going, so this is what you do, and you got to make sure you get the coverage here and stuff like that. Really, I mean, that was the great thing about Full Moon, is you always had the opportunity to learn and like be right there on set watching them do it and learn.
How cool
That's
is
awesome.
that? Head of a Family is one of our favorites on this show too. So that'd be such a wild and fun, like, kind of film school crash course. I mean, that's
absolutely.
I mean, the amount of productions and sets that I were on at that time was pretty amazing, and the amount of people that you interacted with, it was, again, I just got to say, there's nothing like it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So about how long did you have to shoot this movie?
10 days.
10 days. Okay. All right. And that's not including script writing or anything like that. That's just
script writing. I was still doing my job, cutting the trailers and everything, and writing the script. So that took about maybe a month, because it was spread out. Yeah. So, and most of the changes with the script, as far as script notes go, were to scale things back.
Okay.
I had a lot of crazy things in there. I had like flying spiders and all this type of stuff that there was no way that we could do.
I was saying the one thing missing from this movie is flying spiders. And that explains it.
Yeah.
I thought that would be terrifying. It's like, if spiders could fly, that would be how it fit in with everything. I couldn't even tell you now. I think I think the thing is, I really got into Charlie's mindset at that time too. He had started the action figures.
Oh yeah.
So I was like going, well, I better do stuff where he can, make toys out of this stuff. Which is why the 2 lead zombies are so distinct. I was like, well, then he's got something he can make an action figure from. I think the flying spider thing was like, I want something like, Phantasm and the Sphere and everything else. Just again, but it was just too much for what we had budgetarily and schedule wise.
I think that worked out, because I really love that there are like distinctive lead zombies in this movie. It gives it kind of a Hellraiser vibe, and also kind of a Phantasm vibe, like you mentioned, with the portal into the other world. I really like that. You also had a pretty incredible human special effect with Matthew McGrory, who is an actor I really loved. He was I believe he still holds the Guinness record as the tallest actor to ever live. He was 7'8", I believe.
He was 7'6".
7'6". Okay, yeah. People might know him from Big Fish and movies like that.
And Rob Zombie's movies, House of 1,000 Corpses.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And The Devil's Rejects. So
seemed like an incredible guy.
He was fantastic. He was great. I think he just, in general, just sent his photo and resume to the Full Moon casting people. And I
Yeah.
was just looking one day, and his headshot was him standing next to a phone booth, if anyone remembers what those were, but being taller than the phone booth. And I was like,
Yeah.
we have to get, I have to meet this guy no matter what. And he came in and it was like, yeah, if you want to be in this, please, let's do it. And he was just great. I got to know him pretty well, during the shoot, and then we stayed in touch afterwards until he sadly passed away.
Yeah, it was a real sad loss, and what a boon for your movie to have somebody like that. Like, it's, if a filmmaker can get somebody who doesn't look like anybody else and just can kind of like put a mark on a movie, that's always such a boon. And I thought he was really great at that. And I mean, you've got some fantastic makeup and monster effects. Is this kind of where, I know you had like a limited budget to work with, but like you really were able to sort of stretch your dollar on these?
I got lucky. When I was in college, when I went to USC, I met a makeup effects artist who did this movie, Tom Supernaut. And we stayed in touch ever since. So when the opportunity came, at that time, Full Moon was, again, this was after Paramount. This was, we're starting to, budgets and everything were sliding very, very low. And the people that had been doing the makeup effects and everything, which was Jeff Farley and Chris Bergschneider at the time, it's not that I had anything against them, except that they had done so many, they were kind of burnt out on Charlie.
Oh, sure.
So to me, I was like, if we're going to exploit someone, let me get someone fresh in there to do it. So
literally fresh blood.
Yeah. And luckily they were okay with that. So a very limited budget as far as obviously what we had to do, even with the makeup effects, and wanting to do a zombie movie, but even in the writing process of it, knowing that we were not going to have hundreds of extras, we were not going to be able to do, and I didn't want to do a Romero, funny enough, a Romero zombie movie. It's weird now looking back on it when I think about my sensibilities as far as the script goes and the story, and me not being really a quote unquote comedy horror guy, and being much more into Fulci and Romero and those kind of zombie things, and doing something so completely different from them, it even leaves me sort of head scratched at times.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about the timing of this too, when you think, I mean, we've had 25 essentially years now of a reinvention of what we come to expect with zombie movies. I mean, you talk about zombies and people will talk now about Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake, or Shaun of the Dead, 28 Days Later, and The Walking Dead and all that. And this movie predates those. And I think that's pretty cool because
the zombie genre was dead. Sorry to interrupt, but it was dead. There was none. And it was before Resident Evil came out. The video game had come out and sort of started, and I certainly was influenced by the video game.
Me too.
Aesthetically, at least. So yeah, that was kind of exciting at that time because there hadn't been any zombie movies in quite a while.
And I think one of the cool things about it being a zombie movie is you get a chance to utilize makeup effects. I think one thing that I really liked watching The Dead Hate the Living, when you compare it to other movies being made around the same time, was there's more of a reliance on makeup and practicality than there might have been had you had a slightly larger budget, or had you gone slightly outside the genre with more reliance on early digital effects, which we watch stuff from 25 years ago now. Everything that's practical looks leaps and bounds better than everything that is digital. I mean, there's so many poor early stage CGI stuff that
in this movie
awful.
alone. In this movie.
I think there's enough practicality.
No, I mean the quote unquote digital effects of this movie are absolutely horrendous. And it's one of those learning things that you learn now. It's like, boy, at the beginning when you're doing your first movie, one, you're so excited that you're actually doing it, So in one sense, making your first movie is like the best time that you're ever going to have.
Yeah.
Because everything is new and exciting, and even the problems and all that stuff. But when you're that inexperienced and everything, you're moving so quickly, you don't go, wait a minute. We have this scene where these zombies are supposed to be killed by fire, and you don't have practical fire. You don't even have a flame bar. You know, I would have done things. I now, in hindsight, you know, a year from after the movie got released, I would have done things so completely different and gone, wait, this is not going to work, and avoided all visual effects as much as possible.
I mean,
because, you know, you know, it's not that they destroyed the movie. There's many things that the movie falls in on its own weight in many things, but it didn't help.
I mean, look, I will say you fared better than another 2000 full moon movie, Killjoy. We talked about some of the visual effects in that.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
They've aged kind of rough, but I mean, for us watching so many of these movies, like we have to kind of, you know, like we understand there's like production limitations and things like that, but like I think we really got to look at what makes the movie stand out and what kind of makes the movie look special. And I think a lot of it is the script that you have here, because this is one of the rare movies around this time that is actually really about something. You know, it's about, you can definitely feel this love of film sort of coming through, this sort of scrappy energy of like, let's make a movie, to the point where like the final climax is facilitated by people using gore makeup, like a horror makeup as a costume. Like that's so cool. And that feels like, I don't know. That feels like that was something that resonated with me. I'm just like, that's a cool thing to kind of hang your hat on with this movie.
Before Shaun of the Dead, I will say.
Yeah, before Shaun of the Dead.
Having them act like zombies. But then you get the criticism, and I was just like, well, you got to see the actors. You can't leave them in this makeup for the whole time. It was like you had people go, why the hell? It was working. Why the hell take the makeup off? And I'm like, it's a valid point. It's fair. It's fair. But I was like, but my actors are going to be like, well, we can't spend like the last 20 minutes of the movie with our face covered up all the time. So I don't know.
Especially because you have other actors who are supposed to be zombies at that time. So yeah,
right.
No, I understand the practicality of the choice, at least. Yeah.
And then of the references you make, David Warbeck, obviously, a lot of Fulci stuff, a lot of Fulci influence in there. I mean, you know, you do name drop a couple of other people, but there's even a Lucio Fulci tombstone in the background on one part. And so
and that one foolish man who doesn't realize that being called the next Dick Miller is the greatest thing you could call somebody. Like
this is true.
The poor bastard didn't know what he was being told.
Oh yeah, no, that's the thing. He had no clue. Absolutely. But that was the point of that character. He was just like,
yeah.
I'm just this, you know, this guy looking for work here. It's like, you know, I guess, you know, it's like, I don't like horror, which is most actors like, I don't know who you're talking about. That movie is
the hallmarks of a young. I can see the hallmarks of a filmmaker though in here too, like because you referenced like Gino De Rossi too. So you're not just referencing actors, you're referencing effects people and people who worked on production. So there's some background knowledge there that I really enjoyed that aspect of it. There's sort of a youthful exuberance to where you're like, I want to pay homage to these things I love. But you know, you're young, so you're kind of like, I want it to be very on the nose and very upfront. I want everyone to know exactly what movies I know.
So naive. And the thing is this, you know, a valuable lesson learned about all this. And I'm glad that, you know, people find those tidbits and name drops and everything else fun and everything. Again, with no foresight at all, you had to go, you're making this low budget movie for 10 cents, basically. Stop reminding people of movies with bigger budgets that were done better. Don't do it. It just like the geek flag was flying very high during this movie, and no one, I wasn't in any sort of headspace to probably even listen, but no one said, hey, you might want to pull back a little bit here. One or two is good, you know, but all of these maybe, you know, a little much, because again, you are just reminding people of better movies, beloved movies. And the thing is, your references are from beloved movies.
Oh yeah.
At that time. Especially more now, beloved more now. These other movies.
It's crazy how much Fulci has been reappraised. I mean, I know there's always been an audience for Zombie and the Gates of Hell trilogy and stuff, but I really feel like when you talk about Italian directors, and I know obviously like your Argentos and Bavas are a bit different from Fulci and a lot of the stuff that they were doing. I think he was never really looked at with the same reverence until I think maybe the last decade. And now people go back and look at City of the Living Dead and Beyond and Gate House by the Cemetery and the New York Ripper, which is a problematic movie, but one that I think you can go back and revisit.
Well, you just realize, you know, I mean, that's the amazing thing about the time that we've lived in, and the video era and moving into the Laserdisc era and then the DVD and Blu-ray era is, you know, this dissection of these people, and you really start going, no, this crew, this guy, he knew what he was doing. He knew how to do it and do it effectively, you know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I you know, and that was the thing, even at that time in, you know, 99, 2000, when we made this, Fulci was not on everyone's lips. He was still, you know, kind of, you know, the working class, you know, Italian splatter maestro. He wasn't of Argento's level, but the thing is, when you look at the amount of work and everything else, you know, and I love Argento, but you know, Fulci's got as many effective genre movies as Argento does too, and they both have a lot that aren't so good.
I mean, I saluted the geek flag immediately. You know, I appreciated that it was flying because, you know, I like that so many movies about, like, especially if it's a movie about the making of a horror movie, they're dropping a lot of very obvious references. And these were not obvious references. These were some deep cuts, and it kind of informed the character and the production a lot. I mean, I'm just curious, as a filmmaker now, you've had a couple of other films that you've worked on. You've had a couple of other projects. Do you look back on this movie with fondness? Do you cut yourself some slack? Do you pick on some of your decisions? How do you feel about this film now?
I used to be really, really, really hard on it. Again, rookie mistake of reading your reviews when they're coming out. No, I don't recommend it, especially in your first movie, your first baby. I mean, I'll always have a lot of affection for the movie, and the experience of making the movie, and the cast and the crew. People I still keep in touch with.
Great.
But I look at it as a very problematic movie now, in a sense where you know, I should have never been the one to edit the movie. I think what's in there now, it's a 90-minute movie. I think there's maybe 45 to 50 minutes that are really tight. If, you know, I mean, if you took that 90 minutes and cut it down the way it should be cut. So if we could have delivered like a 70-minute movie, I think the movie probably would have done much better, or maybe be embraced a little more. It drags, you know, it's bottom heavy, where a lot of the good stuff happens 40 minutes in. You know, it's when it really starts to get going, and it's like, yeah, I think if I had the skills of an editor that I possess now, I think it would be a much different, much better film.
But it's funny because I feel like when you're young and you're making a movie, you one of the things, the least concerns you have is whether or not a movie is tight, right? It's like everything you did, you want it in there. Like,
that's the problem.
Nothing's going to be on the cutting room floor. It's like,
I fell in love with everything, and there was no one to say, hey, no, we're chopping this. You don't need this. You don't need that. Get rid of that.
It's the kill your darlings thing, yeah.
And the thing is, you know, but give you like a very real lesson in filmmaking, which is that post part, which is a huge part of it. And, and being said, no, you're lose this, cut this, tighten this up, all that stuff. at the time, the powers that be were they were looking elsewhere.
Yeah.
Do you remember, just because of this is kind of at the, I think this falls into the Kushner Locke
Yes.
era of Full Moon. Do you remember, like, obviously a lot of moving parts happening in the studio? Do you remember other projects that were being made around the same time? Like, do you remember kind of like in the studios? I know you said that this was here and not in Romania, but like, do you remember any of the other projects that were going on around you at the same time?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think exactly. I know they were doing things like, kind of around this time, like Shrieker was done around this time.
Yeah.
I think some of the more kid friendly films. I don't know if they were. I don't know if they were called Moonbeam at the time, but there was like Teen Task Force and Alien Arsenal, and then there was I guess the giant monster thing was a little earlier.
Yeah. That was just 2 movies, I believe, right? That was just Kra and Zarkor, yeah.
Right. So there was that stuff. I'm sure there was some Surrender Cinema stuff going on, like Blonde Heaven at the time with Julie Strain.
No, yeah.
I think that was even earlier too, because when I was doing this movie, we had moved from Glendale to then Hollywood, back to Hollywood different offices in Hollywood. And I'm trying to remember. Sideshow was one of them. Definitely shooting around that time too. Like, I think after, because that was like conceptually something that I was like kind of like, oh man, I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Prison of the Dead was one that came after this. I know because Charlie offered it to me, and I said no because there was no script, and he wanted to shoot in a month, and I was being stupid and pretentious at the time and go, well, there's no script. I don't know. It's like idiot. Because that was a Romanian project and I could have gone to Romania and at least had that experience. But yeah, so it was stuff like that. It was definitely like smaller stuff. What was it? Demonicus was probably things like that were around that time.
Yeah, I think
they were cranking out a lot of them.
They were cranking out for dwindling smaller and smaller budgets. Witch House 2 was around that time. And then soon after then it was things like Horror Vision, Killjoy.
Ragdoll, all of those.
Ragdoll. And the Deadly Dr. Bones and the urban films and stuff like that.
Alchemy, big city production stuff.
This is still like, I think this is still the more we get into this show, the more I'm kind of enjoying this era of Full Moon, because it does have, the budgets are definitely dwindling and they're getting a little more resourceful with what they have. But I think they have some really wild movies in this. Like you mentioned, The Creeps, you mentioned Blood Dolls, things like that. There's some really wild and really fun, kind of like creatively unfettered sort of movies coming out of Full Moon at this time. And I think yours kind of falls into that zone. Although yours actually feels a lot better structured than a lot of movies around this time that do feel like they've been kind of rushed through production a little bit. Yours follows like very easy to follow, like thematic beats and things like that. And I think it hangs together as a movie. I genuinely had a good time watching this film.
One thing, Dave, I wanted to ask you about though was, where did this conceptually the main sort of like noseless zombie face design come from? Like, do you remember? It was from Resident Evil.
Okay. Completely. It's shameless. It's just like, I want something that kind of looks like Nemesis. That's cool. It's in a video game. No one will ever make a movie of this. It'll be cool.
So it's so funny because I didn't even place Resident Evil as being as predating that. So that's why it's funny because you kind of poured some water on my potential. I was going to work backwards and say, did you ever notice that Resident Evil kind of looks like this design? I didn't realize that was where that came from. I thought it was the other way around.
Oh yeah, Nemesis would have been out at this time. That was, yeah, I loved that design too. I remember sketching that in art class around that time. Did not get into the art show with that one, but no, I love that. He's got that kind of like recessed lip thing going on, and I remember that cover, the DVD cover, really standing out to me. Even though it took me a long time to watch it, but I definitely remember that DVD cover because I was like, "What is going on with that guy's mouth?" It's like, that's so cool. It looks so weird, and I always thought it was kind of like a alien sort of bulbous thing, and then I saw the teeth down at the bottom. It looks really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the makeup came out really well, and when I saw that photo, that's on the cover, and luckily we were at that time we were doing a lot of like Photoshop sort of posters, or Full Moon was, and I asked Charlie, I said, his main artist was this, who did the classic posters of Dr. Mordred, and, so many of the painted classic posters, was this guy named Lee McLeod. And I asked Charlie, I said, can we please have Lee paint the cover? So we did. And I said, make it look like a Famous Monsters cover. And we used that photo, and it was great because, and I think the cover was effective because, one, it's a freaky looking thing, but two, it's eyes. So you got someone looking at you off the shelf, like as you're walking by, you just see eyes looking at you, and it's like makes a psychological impression, I think.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think it really. I didn't actually realize this was a Full Moon movie until we started getting ready to do the show, because Full Moon had such particular branding prior to that, and then this one didn't necessarily have that on the cover. And that was part of the Kushner Lock kind of transitional period where they're sort of finding new marketing budgets and things like that. But no, I was excited when it came up on the spreadsheet.
No, it's funny. A lot of people think that it was a pickup, that Full Moon picked up the movie.
Oh yeah.
They think it was shot on video. It was actually shot on 35. Maybe the video transfer sucks, but but it was actually shot on film. There's a lot of like weird rumors, like they made it for like $2, and it's like, it wasn't quite that cheap, but it was definitely a Full Moon in-house production. And so
does the 35 print of this thing still exist? Can we get a 4K restoration going?
Well, that's the problem. We never cut negative on the movie. It was all, at that time, it was all videotape mastering. I think it was maybe digibetas, where all the dailies were put, and then that was done on an online session. I'm sure the negative is gone. I don't think there is any way to get this movie in HD. So I don't think there'll ever be a restoration of this movie, unfortunately, so it is this weird. It'll be this weird time capsule thing. I don't even know if the DVD is even 16:9. I have no idea anymore.
The DVD cover is great, though. I mean, this movie would have come out. I was already, if it came out in 2000, I was already in college, so I wasn't as impressionable in terms of, walking down the video store aisle and seeing it. But it has the kind of cover which, if had it come out 10 years earlier, it would have been one I would have snatched immediately off the shelves of the video store and been super excited to throw on, and really expected something crazy from that painting and that cover. Because you're right, the eyes do kind of follow you when you're walking past it. But one of the things, one of the movies that I do have some of an emotional but more personal history with is Puppet Master 3. And so Puppet Master 3, because as we've been doing the show, we realized I've seen a handful of Full Moon movies. There's so many of them that I would never have said before we started doing the show that I had seen all of them or even half of them. But I had seen a couple, 24 or so of them. And some of them I've seen more than once, and I remember well. Puppet Master 3 is one of those. And so I know you were kind of slated to work on a Puppet Master project that was a trilogy of movies. So tell us a little bit about that, because the little bit that I read sounded awesome, and it sounded kind of sad that this wasn't something that we got. And I'm not sure if my chronology is wrong, but was this something? Was this was obviously before Puppet Master 3 was made, or this was after? Okay, because
So what happened was they had made Puppet Master 4 and 5.
Okay.
And then, and this was still during the Paramount years, and I was working there. We, myself and another friend, Jay Wolfel, got hired to write a trilogy called Puppet Wars, which was going to go back to World War II with Andre Toulon, and it was his further adventures after Puppet Master 3.
Oh,
and what Charlie wanted to do was he wanted to sort of tie in a full moon way, sort of the classic monsters. So we wrote all 3 scripts, and the first one was with a mummy sort of thing. The second one was vampires and Dracula a little bit, and then the third one was still with a Dracula type character, but also with a Frankenstein kind of creature. So it was all very, and it was all going to be shot in Romania, and it was going to be done with Paramount. It was going to be bigger budgets, and we were prepping the first one, which was called Curse of the Puppet Master. It went from being Puppet Wars as a trilogy to then changing to, well, we're just going to do one. We'll call it Curse of the Puppet Master, which is where that title came in. And then we had like Tomb of the Puppet Master, and I forget what the third one was called at the time. But they were, I mean, looking back now, we wrote these things and we did them because we were new writers at the time. We did them under the supervision with Courtney Joyner, who wrote Puppet Master 3.
Yeah.
He was sort of the script godfather, sort of guiding us. But it's amazing. I mean, the scripts are out there somewhere online, I think. But I don't know what we were thinking. I mean, they're fun romps. But there's so much puppet stuff that they'd probably still be working on the effects now. There was
really?
so much stuff. I mean, it was like, it was weird. We divided it up where Jay wrote the first one mainly. I wrote the second one mainly, and then we would rewrite and work on each other. And then the third one was sort of a combo thing. I remember in the second one, because it was vampires and everything, and you have 6-shooter, and he's got 6 stakes, and he's like, you read it now and you just go, these would have been, $20 million movies. I don't know what we were thinking, but I think at the time we were just like, well, let's just write what, come up with like something really cool, and then they'll pull us back. So
I like to think Dave Allen could have done something cool with that if this was during that era. I mean, he could have pulled off something, I think. But yeah.
But it was really, really ambitious and big, and it was this thing, and Charlie was really excited about it, and they just went away with the Paramount deal.
Yeah,
they were Paramount funded scripts, so they just went away. They just
that's unfortunate. We could have had like a big Primeval style Puppet Wars Alamo Drafthouse exclusive event, going on in 2024.
It would have been neat. But yeah, we had so many different creatures and stuff like that. Yeah, we had a lot of stuff in those. But I think you can still find. I know it's in that book that you mentioned, and I think there potentially that the screenplays exist online somewhere.
All right, so you're the precursor for both Shaun of the Dead and the Dark Universe at this point, is what you're saying.
Charlie is the the one who movie wise took I mean, his whole thing was in the 90s is like, I'm making the comic books of the 90s just on film. And his plan was, with Mandroid and Dr. Mordred and the invisible character and all these things to team up. I mean, he had artwork with them, he had Mutants 4. He had, he was taking, these things from Marvel, and older comic books. But he was the one who was creating a shared universe before anyone else was.
Yeah. No, yeah, we've talked about it. I know that Dr. Mordred, he definitely wanted that to be kind of I know that I think originally at one point he wanted it to be actually Doctor Strange.
Well, it
And then
started out with, actually, the real thing is with Dr. Mordred is it started out with Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
He worked with Jack Kirby on a thing called, he wanted Doctor Strange, but he couldn't get it. So they created Dr. Mortalis.
That's right, yeah.
And then it turned into Dr. Mordred. So
yeah, and there's two Dr. Mordred sequels that weren't made, didn't get past development, and that stunk reading about them, because I was like, man, they sounded super cool, and everything you read about them said that everyone from Jeffrey Combs to the other people involved were super excited to get back into it, and it's like you can really see the push to making an extended universe here, and it's too bad that the Full Moon as a company, because it is a low budget and a straight to video company, also beholden to this large distributor. Sometimes projects, I think you talk about them and they get brought up and you start development on them, and then they kind of just fall by the wayside, like you're describing there, unfortunately. But every time I feel like we keep learning about, like, we have the movies that we have the ones that are released, and as we talk to people in the company and people involved, it's like we find out about like what the ambitions were for some of the projects, and it's always so cool to hear about it, but it's always kind of sad because it's like, well, that would have been neat, we didn't get that. So I feel you. That's I would have loved to have been able to watch Puppet Wars.
Bride of the Head of the Family has been around for so many years.
Man, that one's kicking around.
I did get to dip my toe in the Puppet Master world with Dr. Death,
Cool.
Which was a whole different Full Moon experience. Going back is, eye-opening for sure. But it was weird too, because, and again, it was very easy because it was kind of an assignment job, and I created it with a writer, and I just wanted to, again, me being a fan, I wanted to go back and like, okay, let me make this feel like one of the old school Puppet Master movies. At least that was the try, with even less time and less money. But I got my foot in there a little.
That's awesome.
Which was kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I could personally listen to these stories all day, but we should let you go. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for being here and for kind of sharing the behind the scenes sort of scoop on this. This was really awesome to hear. Do you have any projects coming up that you'd like to plug? Anything you'd like to point people towards?
Yeah, actually, I have a movie that is a Tubi original that airs Friday called "You Shouldn't Have Let Me In," which is
amazing.
It's a vampire kind of thing. It was shot in Italy in October. So I'm skirting the Empire sort of Full Moon, experience of going to Italy and making movies, just not for Charlie. So that comes out this week. And that's the newest thing.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like it's so weird. Maybe it's coincidental. Maybe it's a Mandela effect type thing, but I feel like I had just recently read that title somewhere. I don't know if I saw some kind of ad for something on Tubi or where I would have read about that, or it could have been something even as simple, Dave, in prepping to get you on the show, look through your upcoming projects on your IMDb.
Probably.
It could have been something as simple as that.
We are dudes who haunt Tubi. Let's be real. We're usually kicking around Tubi. So that's not unusual for us.
You'll find us in the dark corners of that neighborhood often. So
Tubi is the greatest video store that never existed.
You gotta love it. Yeah, seriously, you're getting such bizarre stuff that you'll never find anywhere else. And I like that it's got that archivist kind of feel to it.
Yeah,
it does. I really want to know who is curating the stuff on Tubi, because it's like I'll look, and I remember it went through waves. So I was like, oh, there's some pretty good stuff on Tubi, and I would look, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and so I would put a movie on that I've seen before that's kind of relatively obscure, and I would watch it, and then the recommendations would come in next, and it would be something that was like the next course from that prerequisite, slightly more obscure, and I'm like, oh man, they have that too. Like someone had the the foresight to put that up on Tubi. And then I wasn't really scrolling it so much. I would just kind of like do a basic one. And then I went and looked through, and not only the Full Moon channel, which always has like 200 plus Full Moon and Empire and, you know, Charles Band Productions or related things on there. And then there's also like the William Shatner and Elvira ways to watch some of the movies, which is a fun way to experience it. But a buddy of mine, I got him into obscure horror movies through Tubi, and he's really a novice, but he started scrolling Tubi on his own, and he would send me like texts. He'd be like, "What about this movie? And what about this movie?" And it's like stuff you would never introduce to someone who's doesn't have their toe deep in the pool of that genre. Yeah. And I love that for it. I love that it's like people are just experiencing movies on Tubi the same way they would on Netflix. It's like, this movie is as popular as the Back to the Future trilogy or something like that, as far as Tubi is concerned. And you just, it really does a great job of recreating that video store vibe. And I'm so appreciative that it exists. And, you know, we use the Full Moon app a lot of times to watch things, and the Full Moon app has a lot of great stuff too. But every once in a while, I had a day on Tubi the other day where I was really tired, and it was during my winter break from work. And I just said, I'm going to lay around and watch movies all day. And I watched like 5 obscure horror movies. And I didn't even plan which ones they were. I let the recommendations pick them for me. Yeah. And I watched them, and I really, you know, I had myself a day. And listeners,
there are worse ways to spend a day. Oh, sorry. There are worse ways to spend a day. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. There are worse ways to spend an hour than listening to this podcast. So if you like what we do, then jump onto Spotify or Apple Music and drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on all of the social media platforms. If you just type the name of our show in the order that it is given to you, you will find us on Instagram at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me personally at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We're on X and Threads and Blue Sky and all of those places. And Steve even has another show that we like to plug at the end of this one. Steve, tell them about that one.
Absolutely. Well, as you may have been able to tell from this conversation, in addition to being a movie nerd, I'm also a video game nerd. And so I have another podcast that marries those interests. It's called Cinema Arcade. And every week we are watching a movie and then playing the video game based on it. So we're getting a lot of interesting discussions happening, everything from E.T. to Napoleon Dynamite to fucking everything. I think we're doing Jaws we already did Jaws. We're doing Rocky this week. We're starting to do the Rocky. There's 3 Rocky movies that we're going to cover in a row. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. And you should come back next week because we are going to be talking about a movie that I am not familiar with. And I'm excited to check it out. It's called Delta Delta Die. That's just a great title for a movie. That just sounds fun. That's going to be sorority slasher horror, and that sounds like a blast to me. It's been too long since I've taken a trip down to Sorority Row.
Yeah, and I like that this one, it's like, I feel like listeners at the end of the show are kind of like, ooh, what's the one next week? What's the one next week? And, you know, we've got our heavy hitters that we've rolled out already. We did our Castle Freak and our From Beyond, and people are waiting for Troll and Reanimator and those ones to come out, which we've been kind of holding on to a little bit. But I like to think that there's one super fan of Delta Delta Die who's really happy that that's what we have coming next week. And I don't know if anybody else who's covering that movie. So if you're a fan of that movie, amazing. But if you've never heard of it either, like Steve or myself, this is going to be a first time watch for both of us. Pop it on Tubi and then listen to the episode along. But thank you again to Dave Parker for taking the time to come on and talk to us a little bit. That was such a great time. And we're so gracious that you're so generous to share all those stories. And listeners, we will see you next week for Delta Delta Die.